Now, former President Bill Clinton, during remarks today in New York City, he discussed foreign policy in light of last week's terrorist attacks. He spoke at a forum hosted by the Foreign Policy Association. It's about a half hour.
And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for this forum. It's a pleasure that I, of course, relish, but I'm not sure why I'm standing here doing it, because he's certainly one of those rare individuals who absolutely needs no introduction. And not only does this apply to this audience, but to people all over the world, in every country, every city, town, and village, I'm sure. It's very fitting that we have him here today at the Foreign Policy Association's World Leadership Forum, for he has indeed been a world leader. He's an internationalist in the very true sense of the word, with a very unique perspective on and rich and deep experience with the workings of this global village that we all inhabit together. And I might add, whether we like it or not, we're all in it together, and we can't escape it. So we're privileged to have him with us today at this particular moment of stress and turmoil within our world, to give us his thoughts on the challenges that confront us, and there are many. Or in the words of the theme of this forum, imagining tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, the man who needs no introduction, William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States of America.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Richard and Mary and No Latif. Thank you all for welcoming me here, and thank you for deciding to have this meeting. I understand that a poll was taken of the board, and the decision was virtually unanimous to continue to hold this meeting, and I think that it was very important to do so. It's consistent with President Bush's request to us to get back to normal life in America, and it's very important that we bring in thoughtful people to understand and explore the implications of what is truly the most interdependent globe in human history. I'm also very glad to be here at the Pierre. I'd like to thank the Pierre particularly for providing a temporary home to the firm of Cantor Fitzgerald, which suffered so grievously on September the 11th. And these people here at this hotel did a good job, and I'd like to thank them for what they did. I always love to come back here. I first came to the Pierre in 1964 or 65 when I was a college student, and I had a classmate who could afford to stay here. This is the first place I ever paid $1 for a Coke. And I never come back here that I don't think about it. I must say to all of you that I was of two minds about whether to come today, because I think it's so important for the country to speak with one voice now. And so anything I say today about where we are and where we're going, I hope will be understood clearly in the context of what I believe is a unanimous American imperative to work with this president and this administration and to be completely united in our efforts to deal with the challenges of terrorism and the difficult road immediately ahead of us. I'd also like to say I'm delighted that my longtime friend Governor Engler from Michigan, with whom I once served back when I had a real job, came today and spoke as well. Let me say, the United States has been involved in the fight against terrorism for a long time, certainly going back to President Reagan's administration when we lost so many soldiers in Lebanon. And indeed, even before that, when airline hijackings occurred and our allies lost people to terrorist attacks. But September the 11th clearly changed the landscape forever, and I think changed the public consciousness in the United States and around the world. More than 5,000 people died here, but the whole civilized world was wounded. Even through this heartbreak, however, it seems to me that there are two great testaments to the endurance of our values and our way of life. First is the response of those who were caught up in this tragedy. Terrorists gave up their own lives to kill other people. Americans gave up their own lives to save other people. Hundreds of them. People on that plane in Pennsylvania. The firefighters, the police, the others. Hillary and Chelsea and I have had the honor of meeting a number of them and who survived in the last few days. We met a man at the Rosh Hashanah service in our hometown now of Chappaqua, who was one of those who, with a friend, carried a disabled woman down 84 floors to safety. So I think that this has been an immensely heartening time to see what people have done. Yesterday I went and visited a lot of people who were putting the food together and distributing food, and particularly people that need to be in your thoughts and prayers in the next few days, those who are the mental health workers and the others who are working with the families of people who have been classified as missing but soon will be classified as lost. And to go to that scene over at Pier 94 and see that long wall of those flyers with the faces and the descriptions and the family connections of those people, most of them very young, much younger than most of us here in this room, is a gripping and powerful thing. A man came up to us yesterday and said to me, he said, "You know, I met you once before in Oklahoma." And I said, "Tell me about it." He said, "Well, I met you when you came to visit the victims because I was one. My wife was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing. And when this happened, I just got in the car and drove to New York because I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I thought maybe I could talk to a few people here." So I don't think that the terrorists killed the best part of America. Instead, they gave it a chance to manifest itself. The second thing that I think has been positive is the incredibly unified reaction of the world in support of America's efforts against terror. Of course, more than 50 countries lost citizens in these attacks, as our local paper put it, from Australia to Zimbabwe. There were 300 from the United Kingdom, and after this luncheon today, I thank you for making allowances for the time I wanted to speak, because I've been invited, along with Chelsea, to attend the memorial service for the British victims of this terrible tragedy. But this whole event has united the world as never before around what I have long believed was the central security threat of our time. And it is the flip side of all the good things that are happening in our time. Because there will always be organized forces of destruction unless someone devises some pill to alter human nature, which has not yet been thought of or even approached in all of history. What are all the positive things? The globalization of the economy, the globalization of culture, the increasing diversities, social and both religious and racial, of successful societies, the revolution in travel and in information technology and information sharing, the biological sciences revolution, about which I'll say in a moment. All those things give us a chance to make this new century the most peaceful, prosperous, and plain interesting time in all of human history. But they open new opportunities for the organized forces of destruction, largely enemies of the nation state, terrorists who use sophisticated weapons and information technologies, who take advantage of open borders and the increasing diversity of successful societies to pursue their ethnic, racial, political, and religious grievances, to make war on innocent civilians. They kill innocent people in the hope of killing the collective spirit of free people, of wrecking our success, our confidence, our way of life, and our commitment to freedom for others. I think we know enough already to know they will not succeed, but we also know they will keep trying. Ever since the suicide attack on American soldiers in Lebanon about 20 years ago, terrorism has been a growing threat to Americans. Beginning with that attack in Beirut, the United States has lost more service members to terrorist bombings than have been killed in action since then, including during the Gulf War. In the last decade alone, before September 11th, Americans lost their lives in the first World Trade Center bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing, at the CIA headquarters, at Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia, at our embassies in Africa, and on the United States ship Cole. Now, over this period, more and more Americans worked harder and harder to avoid awful events like the tragedy that occurred last week here. The FBI's counterterrorism budget was almost tripled, with comparable increases for critical parts of the intelligence community. Embassy and military force protection was upgraded. Serious commitments were made to restrict the growth of biological and chemical weapons, to secure nuclear materials in Russia, to increase defenses against cyber attacks. Today, in more than 150 cities, people are being trained and equipped to deal with biological and chemical attacks. Programs are underway to develop new vaccines and antidotes to deal with them. The CIA has made strenuous efforts to develop human intelligence with regard to terrorism, about which I will say more in a moment. As a result, just since 1993, more than a dozen terrorists have been arrested and imprisoned for their involvement in the first World Trade Center bombing, the attacks on the CIA headquarters, the destruction of Pan Am 103. A plot to blow up American planes over the Pacific was thwarted, as was a plot to kill the Pope. After the bombings of our embassies in Africa, several bin Laden operatives were arrested abroad with the help of our allies and intelligence sources. And during the millennium, the largest counterterrorism operation in history thwarted planned attacks against targets in America and the Middle East, including the Los Angeles airport, the Radisson Hotel in Amman, Jordan, and a pilgrimage site for American Christians in the region. The Security Council of the United Nations has imposed harsh sanctions against the Taliban for harboring bin Laden. In 1996, Congress passed the anti-terrorism law, which has resulted in 29 groups being designated as terrorist organizations for whom it is illegal for people in the United States to provide funds or support. There's been some discussion about the cruise missile attack I ordered on bin Laden's training camp in Afghanistan after the embassy bombings. We did it because there was reliable information that he and his senior lieutenants would all be there. They were, but unfortunately they left a few hours before the missiles arrived. After that, we trained commandos and kept the missiles on ready, but the intelligence never justified another reasonable opportunity. Now, because of this awful tragedy, the stakes, the consciousness, and the possibilities of American action have all been increased. We must pursue them with determination and, in a well-known phrase, all deliberate speed. I'd like to offer just a few observations. First, and most important at this moment, we must remain united as one in support of President Bush and his national security team in their efforts to build a global coalition to root out the terrorists, their top aides, their money, their computer networks, and their support from others, including governments. Second, we must support necessary efforts to improve our own defenses, including better security for planes, for pilots, for airports, for other public transportation. Checks on people, background checks, who are in flight training, not just when they apply for pilot's license. Improve security for other possible targets of terrorists, particularly those using biological and chemical weapons. We also need better legislation to improve our ability to deal with money laundering. And as my former Chief of Staff, John Podesta, said in a very good article in the Washington Post yesterday, an op-ed piece, we need better protections to meet the security challenges of communications in the internet age. And I'll just refer you to the article, but John lists about 5 things that I certainly agree with him need to be changed in view of the way people communicate now who are involved in these terrorist networks. Of course, we need to review our other laws and regulations and funding to see if there's anything more that should be done to enable us to get more human intelligence, to confiscate more money, to break into more computer networks. We desperately need the ability to do all 3. But there have been, I think, some misunderstanding, for example, of President Ford's order against assassinations. It does not apply to acts of self-defense against terrorists. It has no application to the present circumstance at all. The CIA's directive on the use of sources who have been human rights violators requires only that there be approval above the field level to pay such sources. And according to the congressional testimony of the CIA director, this has not prevented the use of any source in a terrorism case in any single case ever. Now, nevertheless, there are some field operatives who apparently believe that it is a deterrent to developing sources because they're afraid that they'll present them and they won't be approved. That ought to be examined, the facts ought to be determined, and if that's truth and it's a problem, then the rule ought to be modified. But I think it's important to note that it is true that we need more human intelligence, but it's also true that human intelligence is still the best source we've had for rolling up a lot of the cells that have been turned over the last few years. Third, and I think this is very important and something in which all of you can have a role, we must continue to demonstrate to the world's poor in all the developing nations that America is not their enemy, and to do what we can to involve all people in the possibilities of the 21st century, both in order to increase global growth and stability and to deprive terrorists of more potential recruits. I think bin Laden would have a hard time making a rational indictment against America. After all, just in the last few years, we have continued to open our borders to people from all around the world, including women oppressed from Afghanistan. We used the power of the American military principally to protect poor Muslims in Bosnia and Kosovo. We supported debt relief to the world's poorest nations for health, education, and economic growth. We opened the doors of trade to poor nations in the Caribbean and Africa, and in just a year since the Africa Trade Bill passed, our imports from some African countries have increased by more than 1,000%. We tripled overseas funds for prevention and treatment of AIDS and supported efforts to get life-saving medicines to poor nations at affordable cost. And America has, through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, worked for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East that would be fair both to Palestinians and to Israelis. We have worked hard against the hatred and division that is all too prevalent in the world today. We must continue to do so that terrorists cannot manipulate poor, distressed people for their own ends. The fourth thing we need to do, and again, this is something all of you can play a major role in and should be speaking out about now. As Tom Friedman said in his article in the New York Times just a couple of days ago, one of the things that they are hoping will happen as a result of this is that discord will be sown within the United States. that with all of our myriad diversity here, we will begin to turn on one another and to view our differences as more important than what we have in common. I have been profoundly disturbed, as I'm sure all of you have, by reports of attacks on Muslims in America, on mosques, on non-Muslim Arabs, on Sikhs because they wear turbans, and the pictures on the television show the Taliban leaders wearing turbans. There was even an Indian Christian who was attacked, I read the other day. And all I can say is that this is being done by people right now who are scared, angry, and frankly, by and large, ignorant of what the real roots and belief systems of the people they're attacking are. You can help that. You can help, first of all, not to alleviate their anger, but to direct it into support for the president's policies. And to make sure people understand that not all Muslims are like bin Laden, and not all Arabs are like bin Laden, and not everybody who wears a turban is a member of the Taliban. These are simple things, but America's full of a lot of people who don't think about this all day, every day, like so many of you do, who never had any personal contact with a lot of these people until they began to worry and feel afraid for their own children and their own future after what happened here last week. We cannot let this act divide us. We have to cherish our role as a nation of immigrants more than ever. We have to hold up our diversity more than ever. I was down on the street the other day. As soon as I got back from Australia, I went down to the crisis center back when it was over at, on 26 and Lex, and the people started asking me about this, and I said, look, just look around on this block. We were just standing there on the block, about 150 people on the block. And there must have been people there from 40 different countries, of all different ethnic groups, all different religions. There was a huge man standing next to me who was a head taller than I was, with big tears in his eyes, and he said, I am an Egyptian Muslim American, and I probably hate what happened worse than you do. And I don't want my country to hate me because of what happened. So many of you have been at all this foreign policy business for so many years, and I'll bet you anything, over and over and over again, you've expressed frustration that your fellow citizens did not understand the extent to which America's future was bound up with the rest of the world, did not understand the extent to which there is no longer a dividing line between foreign policy and domestic policy. Well, I tell you, they understand it now. They're listening now. And you have an enormous opportunity to get out there and tell people that people who have a different religion and a different skin color and a different background are not their enemies because of it. You know, a lot of Muslim clerics in America have said to us over and over again in the last few days, this is not Islam. And so when we see these attacks on them, we must say, this is not America. America has got to be a rebuke to the exclusive religious, cultural, and political claims being made by the terrorists who wreaked this terrible act of violence. The fight we face today is not about Islam in America, not about a class of cultures. It is about people who believe that the most important fact of modern life is our common humanity, and others who believe that they have so much greater portion of the truth than the rest of us, that their radical religious and political views justify imposing their will on those of us who are reluctant and taking our lives because we're not really human anyway. That is really what this battle for the future is all about. For good or ill, as was said in my introduction, We are all in this together. The fundamental fact of the 21st century will be global interdependence. And the question, therefore, will be whether, on balance, it is doing more good than harm. The duty of America is to expand the circle of positive interdependence. It is in the interest of the United States, and it is morally right. When we helped Mexico 4 or 5 years ago, that expanded the circle of positive interdependence by helping to make the global economy work better. I believe we did right to help those poor people in the Balkans for the same reason. I believe that the President is doing the right thing to fight terrorism for the same reason. Yes, it's about our security, it's about redeeming the loss of all those thousands of people that were killed, but it's also about saying the 21st century world will be more like America than like the distorted version of reality in bin Laden's mind and the mind of other terrorists who believe they have a right to kill people just because they disagree with them, even if they never picked up a gun or a knife or so much as a slingshot to threaten them. And so I say to all of you, I've been very proud to be a citizen of this country in the last few days. And I have been very proud of all of our friends from around the world who have rallied to our side. This can be the most exciting time in all of human history. I believe that the biomedical advances now being made will lead young women in their childbearing years to give birth to children that will have a life expectancy in excess of 90 years soon. I think they'll be coming home from the hospital with little gene cards telling them what strengths and problems their kids have and what they should do about it. We are on the verge of developing a nanotechnology that will be used in screening to make the MRIs look like Model A automobiles. And cancers will be identified when they're just a few cells in size, totally undetectable by any known device now, making perhaps all cancers curable. We have people working on digital chips to replicate damaged nerves in spines, raising the specter that we might be able to put a chip in a spine like we put a pacemaker next to a heart today so that people in wheelchairs will be able to get up and walk. We're going to find out what's in the black holes in outer space, in the deepest levels of the oceans and the rivers, where by and large, even as late as last year, we were still finding new forms of life. Over the last 30 years, more people have been lifted out of poverty than at any time in history, but we're only scratching the surface of the ability to combine what we know about capital and technology to explode opportunity for poor people in the developing world. This can be the best time in all of human history. But we have to be wise and tough and determined, and we have to begin with the security. Only one person in our country can have the responsibility of making the decisions that the President must now make with his national security team in consultation with our allies around the world. At this moment, we can tip the balance for positive interdependence, for redeeming the lives and the sacrifices of those who perished here and those who have served here with such great heroism. We must stay united. We must be visionary. We must not lose our spirits or our energy or our determination. We can do this. We have to show terrorists that they cannot kill our spirit or our way of life. We have to show people of different faiths, religions, politics, economic standing, culture all around the world that we bear them no ill will if they share our simple value that freedom matters, that everybody counts, that we all do better when we work together, that our common humanity is the only truth in the end we can all share. We have to walk away and walk the world away from the path our adversaries want. I think we've had some very promising steps these last few days, but we have some important things still to do. As I said, I think this organization and many of you as individuals can make a major contribution to fulfilling our responsibilities as a people in the days and weeks and months ahead. Thank you very much.